They call themselves bluenecks.
When humans were discovered locked in their home system due to lack of FTL travel, the slaver races of the galactic community saw fresh meat. A deathworlder species to boot. They would serve well in the mines, in the dockyards, manufacturing, and anywhere hard labor was required and people with enough money didn't want to do it. So an accord was made. The Zafri, the Orgna, and the Tempti would each claim one of Earth, Venus, and Mars to farm new human slaves. The Zafri, chief amongst the Alliance, would claim Earth, being the most populous planet. Orgna, Mars, and finally Tempti would get Venus as the most junior member. At the time of contact, the entire Terran Navy of Sol contained 18 cruiser equivalents, 40 destroyer equivalents, and innumerable picket-class ships, none of which concerned the slaver races. Indeed, the three had dropped out of warp next to their largest gas giant with 15 times the tonnage of the entire system's navy. After glassing the minor moon colonies orbiting the planet, inner system domination took all of 16 standard cycles. Every space-worthy ship of their navy was an expanding ball of gas by cycle 15. However, these humans both refused surrender and were surprisingly tenacious, if technologically backward, warriors on the ground. Their United Nations had sent but one message. An older male with tan skin and white hair stood on the view screen.
I am Secretary General Utain Baku of the United Nations of Sol, and I will have you know that you have not claimed the bulk of humanity. We are fractious. I speak for but a shard, the shard that listens to my whim.
This of course took time to resolve. Where would the bulk of a pre-FTL species even live beyond these 3 rocky worlds and a handful of rocky moons? We besieged their worlds. As is tradition, we built great orbital works, kept a station with our ships in orbit for fire support. We fought on Venus, Mars, and Earth to tremendous losses. After cycle 75, we received an all-frequency message from the Terrans, but not from their besieged worlds. It was from the outer system. It was a single word.
Duck.
Suddenly every geosynchronous ship, orbital, and void hangar had incoming proximity alerts, and went offline as near-sea comets atomized them in bright, blinding flashes. Alarms came up fleet-wide. We received another message from Terra. The same older gentleman from before.
I see the Outer Rim has put their 2 cents in. We don't get along, but they're terribly territorial. I imagine they have already told you to get off my lawn. That would be the Bluenecks out ice miners in the Outer Rim. I can't even tell them to put a shirt on lest they fire on my envoys. Just some good old boys. I may have offered them a lifetime supply of hooch from old Terra to dump their loads on you instead of the colonies. You know, they used to just park those ice balls in orbit, harder to miss something just right than to eat something. And they had damn near 80 days to get that load to, what, 70 to 80% the speed of light. I'll say those bluenecks have no taste in liquor, but they sure as shit know their orbital dynamics.
The invader coalition was mauled, but not cowed. The Zafri commander screeched.
You must have expended every outsystem ship for this gambit, so I am not impressed. You will bow to us one way or another.
Secretary Baku laughed. A deep, belly laugh. A laugh that terminated in a coughing fit.
You daft motherfuckers. There are a billion bluenecks and a trillion ice balls in the belt. You could be here 500 years and those thugs would never run out of ammunition. Do you think our ice balls are more expensive than your battleships?
A reckless victory.
The humans joked as we shot across the vast ocean in the transport craft. They really did like to live life on the edge. The shuttle didn't even have sides. It was completely open to the elements, and gunfire. They said it was for better visibility, while from another perspective that might seem reasonable, considering it was a group of humans, they shouldn't have needed visibility in the first place, considering how advanced their technology was. Then again, it was just their style. They were humans after all, they liked getting up close and personal. What a strange species. They continued making jokes. I didn't speak a whole lot of their language, but even I could easily tell they were making fun of me. I found this strange, and a little bit off-putting, considering I was a member of the very people they had sworn to protect from the Korvac onslaught. After sitting awkwardly for a few more minutes, we finally began to shrink the distance between us and the distant island. As we began to hover over it, I was able to see the full scene as it was laid out in front of me. Thankfully, only a few of the Korvac landing shuttles had made it to the ground. Our planet was on the edge of the galaxy, so despite us sending out a distress signal as soon as we heard the Korvac were planning on launching an assault in order to take over our home world, by the time help had arrived they had already blown through our off-planet defenses and begun to come in for a landing. Fortunately, our planet was mostly water, so there were few places for them to touch down, and we had the advantage. The humans had helped us quickly set up a perimeter around the landing zones, and now we were scrambling to get as many troops together as possible. I felt my feathers ruffle as I stepped out of the uncomfortable seat. The thing was unbearable. It was made for primates like the humans, not a smaller, bird-like specimen like me. We all grabbed our weapons, and lined up behind the little cover the shallow trenches gave us. I noticed that there were a variety of different species taking their own places around the defense lines, but most of them were either humans or Bordians like me. After a few moments of anxiously waiting, the doors opened one by one on the massive, rectangular structures a couple hundred yards away. The humans, of course, being humans, started blasting without a second thought, tearing the first Korvac soldier to shreds before he had even fully stepped out of the doorway. The Korvac began to return fire, slowly pushing forward, setting up little black walls as they moved towards us to use as cover. As they got closer, the humans seemed to be getting even more chaotic. I spotted one dual-wielding rifles, one of them taken from the body of a fellow soldier. A few feet away, another one was blasting music through his helmet, wearing a giant grin on his face. They almost seemed to be enjoying the combat. The battle really didn't last that long, thanks to the assistance from humanity, and within time, the last enemy was shot down. I slowly peeked out from cover, and stared out at the field littered with the strange black, alien bodies of various Korvac warriors. I had never seen victory more brutal than the one the humans took that day. They suffered almost no casualties, despite taking out every single hostile soldier. We gathered around the radio, awaiting field reports from the other battlegrounds. A quick transmission told us that nearly all other enemy landing positions had been won over. We enthusiastically thanked the humans for helping us in stopping the assault, but they simply shrugged it off. They had all departed within just a few short hours, and didn't stay for any kind of celebration. I guess they had another war to attend to.
The Peaceful Warlords.
When we first made contact with a little planet called Earth, home to a species called the humans, we went through our standard invitation process. It wasn't anything we hadn't done hundreds upon hundreds of times before, teaching them about our system of government and our universal set of laws. As soon as we got past the first step, they seemed pretty reluctant, especially about following our communist type of government. This wasn't too out of the ordinary, of course. We had gone through dozens of species just like them who eventually adapted to our system, and it rarely caused lasting conflict. Pretty quickly, however, we learned that not only would the humans disapprove of our way of life, they would outright reject it. For example, we had a Union Standard ship that was used across the galaxy, and it was the only ship permitted for civilian use. We thought the humans would take these ships with gratitude like every other race before them, especially considering their ships were far inferior. However, within a few days, they began to reverse engineer our vessels to create their own. When we first laid eyes on the thing, we immediately disapproved of it. Sure, theirs was faster and stronger, but it was way too deadly. In fact, most of the weapons on their ships rivaled that of our best militaries, when civilians were only allowed emergency stun torpedoes. Needless to say, it failed our safety inspections miserably. But, of course, as soon as we told them they would not be permitted to use these for actual intergalactic flight, they shrugged it off as a suggestion. Looking back, they took almost everything we told them as a suggestion. They really hated being told what to do. When we told them they would have to cut it out or face consequences, they took it as a challenge. They made it their goal to piss us off as much as possible, committing what should have been considered outright acts of war across the galaxy. Of course, after being given samples of what they were capable of, we shut our mouths and move on. After all, they weren't doing too much harm, and it wasn't worth a civil war. Over time, however, they began to earn our respect, little by little. They did improve on our technology quite a bit, even if it was, for the most part, just an attempt to one-up us and rub it in our faces that they were better. They treated us like an annoying younger brother, but one they were dedicated to protecting. In fact, they had somehow brought more peace to our society. No one wanted to mess up when a human was around, and due to our alliances, no one wanted to start a war with us. Despite the fact that they had the firepower to take over the entire galaxy with almost no effort whenever they wanted, they mainly kept to themselves, and we began to call them the peaceful warlords. As time went by, we learned to adapt to the presence of humanity, and look the other way when they were around. Because if they taught us one thing, it's that humans are not to be messed with.
Dear humans, please shoot my commandant.
Dear humans, I know you can read this letter wherever I post it. I know how good your cameras are. I can only assume that your intelligence network is far superior to anything we have. How? Because you refuse to shoot my commandant. Your snipers are amazingly accurate, as we all know, as they have shot just about every leader both above and below my commandant, and we both know why it seems. He was promoted due to helping a general go to Tilnu with the commandant's sister, and the fact his muzzle has graced the tails of everyone worth something at some point the past 5 years of his career. I understand you want to focus on eliminating those with true leadership skills to cause disorder and more issues. It is working quite well, as most other leaders refuse to be transferred to us due to them enjoying their heads and hearts without a hole, or blown apart. That, and those traps you lay in the forest are quite scary. However, your refusal to shoot my idiot commandant I feel is going a bit too far. Yes, he is hurting our war effort considerably more alive than if he was sniped, but if I have to hear a rousing speech before latrine duty one more time, I will handle it for you. Please, it is reaching the point of what you call a war crime, and I fear he will be promoted soon due to being the only one with what little brains he has still rattling around his thick skull. In fact, be sure to use something higher powered than you are using for our leaders so far, due to me fearing that his skull might stop the bullet. We both know this war will end soon with you winning. Please stop letting us suffer under this idiot. P.S. It was him that ordered we shoot down the drone with "party time" written on it with a curve and 2 dots. Desperately, Sergeant Kitnua. Dear humans. Thank you. It was messy, but I enjoyed every bit of the cleanup. Sincerely, and with a bottle of Wilnia left in the forest for the sniper. Sergeant Kitnua.
Most nations submit.
Most nations submit. Whether that is to their enemies or time itself matters not. The simple fact is that when fate or life or destiny wants to, nations submit. And if they submit, they die. Life does not take sides, it only takes and takes and takes. And when there is nothing left, it leaves, allowing the shell to crumble away. But here's the thing. Most nations submit. Not all. But for a long time every nation submitted when life came knocking, that is until the galaxy found the nation of human. When they came to us and told their story, we laughed them out of the room. We didn't believe it. No race, no nation could do the things they claimed. They simply said they fought through what life threw at them. Sure, as if life could be beaten, as if it could be stopped. But then they showed us their museums, their history books, their artifacts, and slowly one by one we began to believe. We began to believe that perhaps their tales were maybe true. They claimed they had moved the great water serpents themselves via a technological device called a dam. They claimed they had cheated death itself by shooting beams of burning light at what they called tumors, but what we called manifestations of destiny. They talked about how they had survived on an apocalyptic hellscape of a planet. A planet that would spew fire liquid from its mountains and quake so violently that their cities collapsed. And how horrific living spinning masses of wind and evil called dust devils would come and pick up their biggest structures and hurl them like children's toys. We were shocked that such ludicrous claims could be true. We knew that such horrific planets existed but had always assumed them to be thoroughly uninhabitable. If one of our colony ships had the misfortune to land in one, we had always believed the only option was to submit to the will of life. That if our citizens had landed on such a horrific planet, then their fate must have been preordained by life. That life itself, in landing them there, had communicated its desire to see their death. And so, seeing as life could not be beaten, only appeased, we had always believed that the most merciful option was best. That to struggle and try to survive would be pointless, as life itself, in its endless power and glory, would inevitably wear them down until they were no more. So if death was assured, our teachings had always indicated the best course of action would be to submit and follow the great light into the next life. And every race we had ever encountered had shared this most fundamental philosophy, that if life wished you death, then you would find it. And that struggling would only prolong your torment. But the humans had proved us wrong. They had proved that the impossible was possible. That a nation, a race could stand up to life itself and win. That somehow, through some combination of willpower and masochism yet unknown to the galaxy, life could be beaten. That the gods themselves could be defied. That destiny was only what we made of it. Contact with the humans changed everything. Our entire way of life was flipped on its head. What were we to do with this knowledge? What was our purpose now? What was our place in a galaxy where only we made the rules? I don't know any of the answers to those questions, and neither did my race. Without the guiding light of the religion of life, we collapsed. We were not strong, like the humans. We were not strong enough to resist life when it came for us. What we did know was that it had all been for naught. That all those billions of bright souls that we had advised to submit to the will of life had been wasted. That each and every one of those deaths was the singular fault of our race. That while we had believed we were only doing the merciful thing, we had instead been party to mass murder on a galactic scale. That we were guilty as charged broke us. The fact that we were monsters broke us. Our society, our economy, our families, our culture, our nation, they all collapsed into anarchy. We ran into the streets blind with emotion, seeking by any means to return to normal. But normal could not be returned to. The knowledge the humans had given us could not be unlearned. And so we went mad. We went insane. We tore ourselves apart and then cried when our hands became stained with blood. We didn't want it. We didn't want this bright, terrifying future humanity had cursed us with. We wanted the assurance of a way of life that could no longer be lived. And so, caught between a rock and a hard place, unwilling to go forward but incapable of going back, we did the only thing we knew how to do. We submitted. And so I speak as former Ambassador Kevshek Anklad, first of the Andoranats to speak with a human, and the last of my race. I speak to this galaxy to learn from our mistakes, to be willing to break with the old and usher in the new. To be strong, like we could not be. To not hide in the darkness of life, but to fight. To break our illusionary bonds that hold us to this path, to struggle and to persevere, as the humans did. To laugh at life, at the gods, and to never surrender. To never give up as we did. To never take the easy way out. To live life as it was meant to be, by making whatever you want of it.
A planet that hunts.
The ship blew up.
Well,
no one was around to hear him, no one to join in the suffering. Everything that breathed on the planet was only concerned with killing, only wanted to cease suffering. He spoke not to be heard, but because he had nothing else to do.
I'm fucked.
He watched the multicolored fireworks of his beloved fighter ship implode. Against the alien night it was almost relaxing, phasmic darts and plumes of electric grandeur, popping and whizzing like the rattles of a dying dragon. When the show ended only he remained, sitting on the brown dirt, doomed. There is a strange hiccup in the anatomy of people, a sadistic twist of the DNA that serves to only play games on us. Tex was crash-landed on the most hostile planet the Federation had ever seen, without gear and without rescue, yet, even with the sound of blood raptors already bounding through the forest, with the sound of claw birds flapping their awful, silky wings, Tex still had hope. The first couple of days were every definition of hell. He was prey, a mouse in the land of lions. With a tenacity only accessible to those battling death, he refused to give up. He tunneled through the thick brush, squirmed in the mud, hid under massive trees. His food started with bugs, with small roots and plants that he hoped wouldn't kill him. Many made him sick, some he thought had finally done him in, yet he persisted. When days evolved into weeks, he evolved into predator. His mind had adapted quickly to the speeds of the jungle. Life was a crashing waterfall, you bounced and moved, you flowed and you spun, but you never stood still. The hunt wasn't methodical, it was fast and ruthless. He never stopped his jog, always he had to be moving, constantly he was on the prowl. The moment something showed up in the bleeding edges of his peripheral, he attacked. No second thoughts, no planning action. Immediate, unbounded violence. Things disappear quickly in the deadly planet, even bones don't last more than a week. The first time he saw another human skeleton, he thought it was a ghost. As he ducked and dived through the greenery, he caught a fast glimpse, a passing visage. It didn't make sense, but his eyes had become too sharp to lie to him. He saw what he saw. There was no home, no inner map. Tex thought the jungle and ground moved. If you made a hut, it wouldn't last. Even the trees got hungry. Sleeping could barely be called rest. The eyes were closed, but the mind never stopped listening, never halted its horrid fear of becoming prey. Tex had learned how to rest while jogging, turn off some strange internal parts of the brain and just stay moving. Even the jungle itself chased him. As he got faster, got stronger, so did the world. Not once did it ever become easier, in fact, time only pressed on him more. Animals constantly stalked him, every day he had to battle for his life, hoping that the poor spear he'd made wouldn't break. More and more they piled onto him. It was deafening, he was choking on survival, being crushed by the weight of primal hatred. But he persisted. One day, months or years into his crash, something snapped. As he pounded through the forest, his ears heard every bug, his eyes saw the details of every shadow. He felt it, felt the change. Something in his veins pumped out into his muscles, writhed in the nerves of his mind and filled the edges of his lungs. Hunting wasn't even a thought, it was an instinct, a blink of action that required no oversight. His heart thumped to the tune of his feet, his hands moved with the swiftness of the breeze, everything, his entire person, it alchemized with the forest, it merged with the planet. He was no longer human, but pure, instinctual animal. He was one with the planet. It was only then that he was allowed to see it. Running through the woods, avoiding branch and root, he popped out into an open field. The planet never had fields. Naturally his movement didn't stop. Without thought he kept his momentum and charged into the field, analyzing it with quick and efficient swipes of his eyes. A building, concrete and square with only one door. One door and a sign. It was a poem. Could he even still read?
Cursed be the man who is both, for he is God's broken toy. Cursed be the man who knows both, for he is welcome nowhere, he only persists.
The door opened, exposing a staircase down into the earth, long and iron. With a biting jaw and memories of humanity, Tex felt he had no other option. Behind him lay the forest that didn't rest, the hunt that never stopped. He descended the stairs. Yet, his senses had grown too keen to let him lie to himself. The stairs reminded him of humanity, but he knew he wasn't going anywhere humane. He was going deeper.
Human medics are scary.
Medicine is important. As it turns out, being able to prevent or slow down death using science is quite the achievement and one of the biggest advantages intelligent species have when compared to common animals. Medicine is a great tool for good and peace. So, naturally, everyone adapted it for war. The equation is simple. Fewer soldiers dying means more soldiers on your side and therefore higher chance of victory. That is how battle medics, or combat healers, or whatever name your species gives them, were born. Men and women whose job is to minimize losses on their side so the other soldiers can maximize losses for the enemy. Now, while the core of their profession is still the same, most empires like to add their own flavor that matches their military doctrine. The Zelotes for one aren't fond of the idea of dying without the right rituals, so their military clerics both heal the wounded and pray for the dead. Some, like the Glomuli, are obsessed with the idea of a worthy death, and their medics are there mostly to give the ones deemed worthy but beyond healing a quick and painless death and to reassure the others that their comrade died like a hero. There are also some that blur the meaning of medic. The Capulans are so utterly stuffed with mechanical modifications that their training consists of more engineering than actual medicine, and since they are so tough to kill, most of their job is just dragging broken soldiers out of the front lines and scavenging for pieces from the dead ones. But there is a very nice constant among all medics: compassion. The Zelote clerics treat the dead with respect and care for the wounded like they are their children. The Glomuli medics tell tales of the great deeds that the fallen soldiers have done while fighting for the Empire. Even the medics of the Capulans show compassion to the fallen for allowing their reused modifications to bring forth a new generation of soldiers. What would a medic be without compassion and kindness? Well, that would be a human medic. Humans are not, as some less informed may claim, psychopathic maniacs incapable of feelings, though they certainly may seem that way for anyone that only watches their wars. No, humans are quite the average species in most regards, with their main quirk being their seemingly otherworldly railguns. When we found the humans, they were steadily expanding their borders and generally going with a "don't bother us and we won't bother you" mentality, which most nations could get along with. Nothing good lasts forever, of course. Humanity eventually started to run out of empty space to colonize, and so they made a couple of alliances with their neighbors to make sure no one would try to mess with their borders. The most significant of these alliances being the one with the Glomuli. And then, as it was bound to happen someday, a minor border dispute between humanity and the Zelotes grew into a small war, which then evolved into full military action. The Glomuli were called to honor their alliance, and they did so by sending a force of volunteers. Most were young men trying to earn honor and old veterans wishing for a glorious end against the enemy. No one expected the humans to win. They were much younger than the Zelotes and had only half the territory, but a promise is a promise. After 5 years of conflict, a treaty was signed which, surprisingly, ended with a costly human victory. After the Glomuli veterans came back, they told the others about the war, about the great machines of carnage and fire that killed and destroyed everything in sight. But the machines and death weren't the worst part, not by a long shot. The worst part were the human medics. The human medics did not let the warriors die in glory. They did not show compassion or pity, only rage. Any medic should know that trying to save a man that has been torn in half is a waste of time, and they should instead focus on giving them a quick end. Not the humans. They told tales of medics sewing wounds of dying men, all while screaming at the top of their lungs that the soldiers didn't have permission to die. Men whose legs had been literally torn to shreds would inject themselves with a concoction of drugs so they could keep on treating the wounded until the bitter end. Veterans came back to their families after some stupid healer decided to carry them to safety across the entire battlefield, all while being shot at instead of letting them die. People across the galaxy had mixed reactions to this doctrine. The Capulans thought it was efficient and started placing implants on their medics that made them more aligned to humans. The Zelotes were utterly disgusted with the idea of forcing a soldier to keep on living after being brutally mangled, and many others had different opinions on the matter. But no matter the species, nation, or culture, there is always one thing that all soldiers who have seen human medics in action can agree on. They are goddamn scary.